Maybe like me, you sometimes watch these series on streaming television, and I know that I appreciate when they have like the recap, like the previously on. So, because sometimes, maybe it was a few days ago, I didn't want to forget any important details, or maybe I dozed off during the episode and might have missed something, especially like the dramatic conclusion of the episode that tees up the next one. So I appreciate the recap. When we come to Mass Sunday after Sunday, sometimes we just take the gospel like in individual chunks, but so often it's all kind of connected. And the same is true today, that last week we started Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which is 3 chapters in Matthew. So we had Matthew 1 to 12, and today we have Matthew 13 to 17 and chapter 5, but it's all connected. It's all connected. And so I think it's important today to not hit the skip recap button, but I think we need to look at previously on the Gospel according to Matthew. We had those Beatitudes, God's blueprint for his disciples, those characteristics of who a disciple is. So we heard that a disciple is one who steps into being poor in spirit and willing to be mourning and meek, one who's hungering and thirsting for righteousness, for that relationship with God, one who is merciful and clean of heart and a peacemaker and willing to be persecuted for the sake of Christ. So all the characteristics of the disciple listed in those Beatitudes. And the Beatitude meaning happiness, not a sentiment, but a state of being that comes beyond ourself, but has its source in God. And then so right after that, I think Jesus doesn't change the topic, but he goes from maybe describing characteristics to then giving examples, like concrete images, to tease this idea out more. And so he says to his disciples, you are the salt of the earth, and you are the light of the world. It's interesting if we think about it, that salt and light, they in a sense don't do anything on their own, like isolated, but always in relation to something else. So salt only does its thing when it's acting on something else. So you wouldn't go to a Super Bowl party tonight and your host is bowl of salt? We just don't do that. One, it's not really healthy. And two, it doesn't make any sense to us, because salt does its thing when it's acting on something else. So we know salt brings out the flavor in food. Salt preserves foods. Salt makes people thirsty. Pretzels are making me thirsty. We know that salt, maybe you didn't know, in the ancient world, salt was also used to dump on an enemy's field so that nothing would grow there. As Jesus says, you, disciples, are salt. And so we kind of do our thing when we're acting on something else, so to speak. So our Christian life ultimately is not meant just for us and our good, but is meant for the good of others. So that our Christian life should help enhance the flavor of the world, and to, in a sense, bring out the flavor of God in our world, so it's not so bland. Our Christian life should preserve what is good in the world. Our Christian life should make people thirsty. Through their encounter with us, do people then have a little more thirst for God because of their encounter with us? And like with the field, we should be throwing salt, I guess, on the field of the enemy, of the evil one, so that his fruits can't grow up in the world. All these different ways that we use our faith, our relationship with God to be salt. We're also called to be light. In a sense, light isn't maybe like a thing on its own. Light only helps, right, us to see what's already there. So we can appreciate the beauty of things more, so we can walk around easier without stumbling, like tripping on a branch or running into the end table, or we might still do that. So light shows what's already there. And is our Christian life a light? Do others see the presence of God in us? Do others see the love and the mercy and the justice and the peace of God in us? Are we able to show forth the truth and goodness and beauty that ultimately comes from God? Likewise, in our gospel, when Jesus talks about light, he talks about a city set on a hill. Especially before streetlights, electricity, people would have used a city up on a hill as like a beacon, as like an orientation, kind of like a lighthouse, on the shore, but in the middle of the land, so that people knew, like, yeah, I can head towards that and find a place to stay and be safe and not in the dark anymore. Does our Christian life help orient not only ourselves but other people to the relationship with God that they were made for, and to find a home in the people of God and in the church? So just like salt and light, we're to exist really for the good of others. Going back to those Beatitudes, again, that word blessed means happy, and they speak to that happiness that we all desire deep down. So Jesus ties that deep down happiness to existing for others and stepping into that. We're never, ever going to be happy if we're preoccupied with our own happiness versus stepping out of ourselves to love in God and neighbor, which brings us that fullness, that fulfillment in life that then is the source of the happiness that we are longing for. And of course, God is here to help us to step into that, especially with his very presence here in the Eucharist at Mass, when we have a Holy Communion once again in his very life and are sent out to live it. So as we encounter Christ here in the Mass today, just know that we have that grace, that help from God, that we have a share and a participation in the self-offering love of Christ that helps to make us who we are for the good of those around us and for the greater glory of God.